there's some amount of unknown information that you don't get a chance to respond to. And that feels a bit strange for Magic.
Distraction makers.
With the announcement of Foundations, Wizards of the Coast has announced that they're changing something about the combat step.
Yeah.
So we thought we would get together and talk about how we got here and maybe what this means. Let's just hop into the combat step and how it's changed over the years. Originally, this is before my time, so I'm a little fuzzy in this area, but originally the combat step wasn't a combat step at all. It was just you had one main phase, and you would declare attackers as part of your main phase. You would do the combat step as part of the main phase.
Yeah.
And you just only got one during the main phase. And then I think over time they realized that structure was a little too loose. You know, early on the stack was like formalized in a different way. It was called like batching, but I don't really know how that worked. All I know is about at 6th edition in 1999-ish, Magic added the stack. And this is when damage also used the stack. So they basically took everything that is sort of a decision point and put it in the structure of the stack.
Not to belabor the point too much, I think we should maybe briefly explain what the stack is, because I think what we're talking about here is a very good lesson for any designer, what we're going to get into. And I don't want to alienate anyone. Like, talking about the stack is probably the most complicated thing about Magic.
Right. And if we're talking to people who don't necessarily play Magic... Yeah. Okay.
Before we start talking about combat changes in Magic the Gathering today, please, if you like our content, you can give us a little like and subscribe and a comment. Also, you can find a link to our Discord down in the description below. And today's video is brought to you by...
Hey guys, Gavin here in the editing room. Just wanted to give you a quick update on Bullets and Teeth and Aliens. We are nearing the end of the campaign. We've got like 6 days left at the time that you guys will see this. And we are 92% funded. So we're just almost across the finish line. There's been a huge turnout from distraction makers already, so I appreciate all of your support. But if any of you still wanted to check out the campaign, there'll be a link in the description below. 92%, come on. Okay, back to the video.
So in Magic, you have a priority system, first and foremost, before the stack, where almost any action you take, whether that's moving to a different part of your turn, whether it's playing a card, taking any kind of action, these things pass priority to your opponent. You as the active player have priority first, so if you cast a spell, you can maintain priority and then cast another spell before your opponent gets a chance to do anything. Any action you take, then your opponent will get priority and get the opportunity to take any kind of action they want, as long as it's something that can happen at instant speed, which is a subset of actions and spells that can be played on your opponent's turn, effectively.
Right.
So that's something like using a creature's ability or playing an instant spell. Those are probably the most prominent ones. 6th edition, damage is on the stack, which what that means is that damage then is assigned to the creatures that are in this combat, and before the damage is actually dealt, we have damage on the stack, which means that the damage has been assigned, but it hasn't been dealt yet.
Right. Similar to you're trying to cast a spell, but it's on the stack. So this is you're trying to deal damage, but it's on the stack.
Anytime information is revealed, you have a chance to respond to it before it's done, right? Before it resolves. And this is the lesson. We'll come back to it. So keep this in mind.
Keep it in mind.
That I think was the original design principle of the stack, is how do we make sure that any information that is revealed before it's consequential, we have a chance to respond if we have the resources to do so. Okay, so that's how damage on the stack worked. Now, the reason why they changed this, it was changed in 2010. They changed it to what then was affectionately called the conga line of death, but we'll come back to that too. So why this was the design reason for why this was changed was because when you had damage on the stack, you got to sort of double dip with creatures that had sacrificing, basically any kind of sacrifice ability. You got the double dip, where that creature could both deal damage and then also get the effect of sacrificing it. This is a weird, bit like kind of counterintuitive thing where it feels like this shouldn't be the case, right? Like
your
the creature's
not
there,
gone, so why is it still dealing?
Why is it still dealing damage?
Yeah. Which we're still dealing with that in a different way now, but with blockers. Where my blocker's gone, but why did I not swing past
Why did the
them?
damage not go through? Yeah, that is a thing that's happening still. And will continue to happen with the new rules. That didn't change.
That's true.
So, damage is removed from the stack in 2010, and we go to what is basically blocking assignment, or the conga line of death, which means that I attack with my 5/5, you block with your 3/3 and your 2/2, and then me as the attacker, I get to decide what order I'm going to deal damage to those creatures in. And then the order is declared, and then we have a chance to go back and forth. But the damage, once the damage is there, is going to happen. It just does in the order of which I've assigned the blockers.
Right. And it carries through, right? It's almost like a miniature trample, right?
It's a conga line, yeah. So
right.
the one that's in front dies first, and then the damage keeps going.
Any damage carries over into the next one.
This started to open the can of worms a little bit into this, like, eroding the stack a little bit, and that we're moving into, like, okay, well, now there's something that is happening where I'm signaling what's going to happen. And Mark Rosewater even brought this, I think it was Mark, where he was talking about this new change and how the sort of assigning order of blockers was almost like an artifact that was from damage on the stack, where this thing that I'm talking about, where there's information being revealed here. We want players to feel like they have as much information as possible before they make decisions. Right. Finally, let's talk about the new rule. The new way that combat works is you still declare attackers, you still declare blockers, but then you don't assign damage until the very last step. The action just happens, and there's no chance to respond. So if I have a 5/5, you have a 3/3 and a 2/2, I attack with the 5/5, you double block with your 3/3 and your 2/2. I don't have to tell you where that damage is going until it's already happened.
You don't know if the player is going to try and send that damage more to the 3/3 or more to the 2/2, or which they're going to attack first, or how that damage is going to be split up.
In a lot of instances, I don't think this is really going to be that big of a deal.
If you're playing combat tricks, it will be.
If you're playing combat tricks, it will be, well, if you're playing combat tricks defensively, this is a big deal. So what you used to be able to do with assigned blockers was double block your opponent's creature and then have them assign the blockers in whatever order, and then you play a combat trick.
You get to respond.
Yeah, you get to respond before that's done.
And how does it work now?
Now, I'd attack with my 5/5. You block with your 3/3 and your 2/2, and then I go, okay, is that it? Are you going to do anything else? And you're like,
giant growth,
my
3/3.
My 3/3. And I go, okay, cool. I kill your 2/2.
Right.
I still get to say, 2 of my 5 damage goes to your 2/2.
Right. Which I will say, look, played a fair bit of arena at this point. And yes, it was unintuitive having the organizing of blockers when I first started. And it could be frustrating if I didn't quite understand how it worked. Now I understand how it works a bit better, so it's not as frustrating. I'm not surprised when it happens. So it's hard to say if I'm going to prefer this change or not prefer this change. But we'll talk a little bit about what does this mean? What does this mean for the game? Right. Because I think a lot of people have talked about what the changes are, but what are the actual lasting consequences of this, if there are any? What are the benefits, pros and cons?
Right. Well, first and foremost, it's going to take a little while to see how it all kind of shakes out. But off the jump, we can see that attackers have a bit more of an advantage now in terms of information asymmetry, right? You're not, as a defending player, you're not going to know where that damage is going to go until it's already gone there. Also, defensive combat tricks are now kind of at a disadvantage. And this was something we were talking about in our Discord a little bit, where the point that this is kind of a suboptimal play anyway is brought up. And my sort of response was, yeah, but like you can be in a position where that is the most optimal play you can make. And often this is something that happens more in like a limited environment where
Combat tricks are a much bigger deal. I feel like
right, or small edges matter a lot. Where in that environment, a defensive combat trick like that works as sort of pseudo removal. Where if my opponent opened a very powerful card and I didn't, but I happened to have, I didn't get great removal. I didn't get like the deck just didn't quite come together like a deck normally does.
You're able to use your combination of combat trick with lesser creature to beat their better creature.
Right. And not only that, I was able to do that at an advantage, right? Where I could trade my combat trick for your more powerful creature. Because of, the you as the attacking player not sort of reading the signals correctly and not thinking about, what might my opponent be able to do here before you declare the attacker. And now, in every instance of that interaction, you still get a 2-for-1 out of that creature. Right. Where previously I could turn that into a 1-for-1 and only have lost my combat trick.
And we should explain, you get a 2-for-1 because it takes up the spell from your hand and you're able to remove the creature. That was part of the double blocks.
Yes.
So I think maybe getting in a little bit here as to like, what is it good or bad to have advantage or disadvantage for attackers versus blockers? Because traditionally Magic actually kind of skews a little differently from what other TCGs do, and that Magic has the highest advantage for the defending player during combat. Most TCGs actually do not have that much advantage to a defending player, which is why you see a lot of games that are coming out that are having blockers be a mechanic, not ingrained in the actual turn structure and combat phase.
Usually the biggest consequence is that you see snowballing, right? You see that like there's this concept in Magic called Who's the Beatdown. We're not going to get into it all the way through right now, but basically it just means that like if nothing were to change, who is going to win the game? Like if things keep going in the same direction that they're going, who will win? And once that momentum is established by one player, if you advantage attackers, it continues to build effectively. And this, I think, has been one of Magic's strengths, is that you have to not only do you have to fight through what your opponent is able to play, which means you're incentivizing interaction, it's also up to your opponent whether or not their creatures are going to be engaging with yours. So, when we have other systems where you can attack creatures directly, those creatures tend to not stick around on the board, so that you as a player aren't really choosing, this creature, it's not really a creature, it's more like an enchantment that I'm getting an effect from, and the only way for my opponent to get at that creature is to play some kind of removal spell. They're not able to say, I'm attacking that thing directly. Right. There's a whole lot of cascading consequences because of this, in terms of the way that things you have to spend your mana on and things, but this is getting very much in the weeds in terms of like why Magic system advantaging defenders ends up creating more interaction effectively.
Right. If you end up looking at something closer to like Yu-Gi-Oh, right, where Yu-Gi-Oh does have, in order to get to your opponent, you have to directly attack each monster on the field. So you, as the attacker, get priority of what you are going to be attacking. It is a much swingier game that often has a lot of snowballing effects because you have the advantage of picking the most optimal attack for you based off information that you now have, because Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't use a stack, it doesn't have reactions. There's trap cards, but that's different. There's not really a reaction that the players have. And this is usually what we end up seeing when there's higher attacker priorities in these games. And I think it's tough because what we've seen as I guess if you want to call it a consequence or whatever, a reaction to Magic system is that you see a lot of turtling. So you see a lot of players that I was in a match this morning while I was drafting where it was basically, okay, I play a creature and then they play a creature and then I play a creature and we're kind of doing the math and I'm like, okay, I don't have lethal damage. And so we're just kind of at parity trying to make sure that, not one of us is going to be disadvantaged until one of us can swing through and kill each other or kill the other person.
And that sort of game state, I think, ends up happening a lot more in limited than it does in constructed environments just because your game plan isn't quite as cohesive. Sure. Yeah. But it is a problem when you are concerned with game time. Right. And part of modern design, in terms of mobile games, in terms of anything, is game length. Like game length is a huge problem. where you want to be. I think at this point, 5 to 10 minute range for a game is probably where you actually want to be. We can look at things like Marvel Snap, and that you can see that they are very tightly designed around a game time idea, where you get like 6 turns and that's it, something like that. But in Magic's case, extending game length, I think that this choice is partially to do with game time. I think it is partially motivated by we want games to be shorter. We want attackers to have a slight bit more of an advantage so that we can move through games quicker.
I think it's probably a mixture of game time, and if I were to assume, I think that's an attempt of trying to streamline or make this a little less complicated. I think it complicates things in another way, but I do think it's less complicated if an attacking player doesn't have to then think of what your opponent's reaction might be to something.
I'm still going to get something out of this attack. Yeah, that's true. There was kind of, some feel bads in terms of like, well, I thought this attack was profitable for me, but by the end of how everything played out, it wasn't. But like, that's a higher skill ceiling thing. That's like a higher skill level. But I think that now you almost have the opposite potentially happening where, as an attacker, you're like, all right, I'm attacking, and defender's like, okay, I'm going to block with my 2/2 and my 3/3. I guess I suppose the mindset shift is I have blocked, therefore that creature is now in danger. Right. Where previously it could have been, well, I have blocked, but that creature might not actually be in danger. I might be bluffing to my opponent, right? They're going to arrange them in the order they're going to arrange them in, and then I have a way to sort of undercut what my opponent thought was happening.
Yeah, it definitely makes, I not that I've played with the system yet, but what I'd imagine is that it does significantly change the feeling you have as a defending player. As a defending player, a lot of the times I would feel like I'm somewhat in control of this. Like I can react, and I have an opportunity to sort of gain an advantage here. But now it really feels like a lot of that is kind of out of your hands.
Yeah, and really it's that there's some amount of unknown information that you don't get a chance to respond to. And that feels a bit strange for Magic. I'm not going to say that it's the wrong thing for Magic. I just think that it is substantially different than the design philosophies of the past.
Right. We talked, at the beginning, we mentioned briefly like the different phases that you can't respond to, and for the most part it seems either deliberately to set the player at an advantage, or at the very least to streamline the phases of turns.
Yeah, or just things that aren't really consequential. Right. Yeah. Where this is very consequential, right, and there's no response once the information is known. And I'd imagine the information is known and resolved simultaneously.
I'd imagine this is probably just a very difficult problem to solve for Magic designers, because since the introduction of the stack, it's like they couldn't change the game where you can't suddenly not block with 2 creatures anymore, because that would probably just solve a lot of this, make this a lot simpler to know how stuff is going to be resolved. However, the game was out for a long time at that point. They're not going to change that many things about the system of the game, but instead they're trying to make it as close as possible probably to how the stack functions, but within a phase that is very unique to how the rest of the game works.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if I'm sure they're trying to find the most intuitive thing. The push towards welcoming new players into the game has been very strong in the last, 5+ years, which makes sense. Like that's not something that I would criticize. So if the designers have done the work to see that this is just more intuitive for players, which I think it probably is, then it's probably a net positive. But in terms of higher skill level, intricate Magic that's probably mostly played in a limited format, am I a little sad to see that I guess a high skill play, like knowing when it is right to make a suboptimal play to play a combat trick defensively. I'm a little bummed that that's not, it's still a thing. Like you can still save your creature, but you're not really getting much of an advantage at that point. I do think that this might make the game more swingy in terms of I don't have the removal for my opponent's bomb immediately, and they're going to get a substantial advantage from having that much more aggressive creature.
Right. But we're not sure if that's such a high level of advantage that it's going to just really prioritize attackers, or if this maybe sort of balances out a little bit more and goes a little bit more towards the middle. Not sure.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's the part I mean, we can see that it affects blockers. It moves the advantage a bit more to attackers, but does that mean it's more in line, or does that mean that it's now too far in attackers?
Right.
We'll see.
Only time will tell.